My brother called my startup another failed project in front of our entire family at Thanksgiving dinner, while I was still sleeping on a mattress in a warehouse, coding 16 hours a day on a prototype nobody believed would work. He said it with that particular smile he perfected since childhood, the one that looked like concern, but tasted like poison. Our mother nodded slowly, her silence a kind of agreement. Our father changed the subject to my brother's new position at the consulting firm, the one with the corner office and the business cards thick enough to carry weight in your hand. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply watched him across the table, the way you might observe an insect trapped in amber, already dead, but not yet aware of its condition. 3 years earlier, I'd shown him the initial concept. Late night in my apartment, pizza boxes stacked like architectural failures, my laptop screen glowing with the wireframes that would eventually become the foundation of everything. He'd looked at it for maybe 40 seconds before shaking his head. "You're wasting your time," he'd said. "Enterprise resource planning systems are a saturated market. The big players own it. You think you're smarter than IBM, than Oracle?" But he'd asked to see the code. Just curious, he'd said. Professional interest. I'd shown him. All of it. The machine learning integration that could predict supply chain disruptions 3 months in advance. The security architecture that made conventional systems look like they were protected by birthday cake padlocks. The user interface so intuitive it required zero training, which, in the enterprise software world, was like discovering room temperature superconductivity. He'd nodded, made appreciative sounds, then left around midnight. 2 weeks later, his consulting firm announced a new strategic partnership with a software development house in Estonia. 6 weeks after that, they started pitching an enterprise resource planning system to mid-market companies. The marketing materials looked suspiciously familiar, not identical, just familiar enough to make me go very, very quiet inside. I'd hired a lawyer. The lawyer had explained, in the patient tone reserved for the naive, that ideas aren't copyrightable. That without a patent, which I couldn't afford, and without proof of actual code theft, which I didn't have, there was nothing to be done. My brother's firm was simply operating in the same space. Convergent evolution, the lawyer had called it. Happens all the time. I'd thanked him and left. The thing about rage is that it burns hot and fast, and then it's gone, leaving you empty. But what replaced my anger was something far more dangerous, a kind of crystalline clarity, a perfect understanding that the world didn't operate on fairness or justice, but on leverage and information and the patient application of pressure to structural weak points. I went back to my warehouse. I stopped sleeping on the mattress and instead slept 3 hours a night in a sleeping bag directly beside my desk. I stopped trying to build a company and instead focused on building something else entirely. A machine that could see around corners. The machine learning algorithms I'd been developing weren't just for supply chain prediction. That was merely one application. What I'd actually created was a pattern recognition system that could analyze massive datasets and identify non-obvious correlations. Financial correlations, behavioral correlations. The kind of thing that could look at 1,000 different data points and tell you exactly what someone was going to do 3 moves before they did it. I fed it everything I could find about my brother's consulting firm: public financial records, LinkedIn connections, court filings, property records, social media graphs, the digital exhaust that every company leaves behind like a trail of breadcrumbs for anyone patient enough to follow. The system showed me something beautiful. My brother's firm was running on borrowed time and stolen credibility. The software partnership with Estonia was a disaster. The code was buggy, the developers inexperienced, and the clients were already filing complaints. But they'd sold the contracts based on projections that assumed a level of functionality that didn't exist and couldn't exist with their current architecture. More interesting, the firm's managing partner was cooking the books. Not dramatically, just small adjustments to revenue recognition timing, the kind of thing that would survive a casual audit but would crumble under forensic analysis. And my brother, in his eagerness to climb, had tied himself to this partner like a mountain climber roped to a corpse. I didn't report them. I didn't confront anyone. I simply watched and continued building. My actual startup wasn't the enterprise resource planning system anymore. That had been the decoy, the practice run. What I was building now was something far more ambitious. An AI-driven platform that could integrate with existing enterprise systems and make them intelligent. Not replace them, enhance them. Which meant every company already locked into Oracle or SAP or any other major platform wasn't a lost customer. They were a future customer. I brought in my first employee, then my 5th, then my 20th. I moved out of the warehouse and into an actual office, though I kept the aesthetic sparse. Silicon Valley was full of companies burning millions on foosball tables and kombucha on tap. I spent money on 3 things: talent, infrastructure, and patents. Especially patents. My brother didn't notice. He was too busy managing the slow-motion collapse of his firm's software partnership and trying to insulate himself from the managing partner's increasingly creative accounting. I waited. Year 2, we closed our Series A funding. $8 million from a venture capital firm that specialized in enterprise AI. The partner who led the deal had done his homework. He understood exactly what we were building and why it mattered. Year 3, our customer base hit 50 companies, then 100, then 200. Each implementation generated data that made the AI smarter, which made the product better, which attracted more customers. A flywheel, spinning faster every quarter. That was when I received the first overture from Google. Not an acquisition offer, not yet, just a conversation. A senior vice president wanted to discuss potential synergies. I took the meeting. We talked for 3 hours. He understood the technology at a depth that surprised me. At the end, he'd said, "We'll be in touch." 6 months later, they came back with a term sheet. I didn't tell anyone outside my board and my lawyer, not my parents, certainly not my brother. The due diligence process took 4 months. Teams of Google engineers crawling through our code, our financials, our customer contracts, our patent portfolio, looking for deal breakers. They found none. The final offer was $38 billion. $38 billion. The number was so large it stopped meaning anything. It became abstract, a score in a game nobody was keeping. I negotiated 2 additional conditions. First, that the announcement would be made at the Tech Global Conference in San Francisco, where I'd be giving a keynote. Second, that the deal would include a public presentation of our technology and its applications. My brother would be at that conference. His firm always sent representatives. He'd told our parents about it at the previous Thanksgiving, explaining the importance of maintaining visibility in the industry. The morning of my keynote, I stood backstage listening to 7,000 people filter into the auditorium. My phone showed texts from my mother, my father, even some cousins I hadn't heard from in years. They'd all seen the news. The Google acquisition had leaked 3 hours before my talk, as these things always do. My brother's name wasn't among the messages. I walked on stage to applause that felt like physical pressure. The lights were bright enough to erase the audience, turning them into a collective darkness punctuated by phone screens. I talked for 40 minutes about the technology, the vision, the future of enterprise AI. I showed demos that made the audience gasp. I announced partnerships with 6 Fortune 500 companies that would go live within the quarter. And then, in the final 5 minutes, I told a story. I told them about a young founder who'd shared an idea with someone he trusted, about how that trust had been weaponized, about how that betrayal had taught him that the only protection in business was to build something so far ahead of everyone else that by the time they understood what you were doing, you'd already crossed the finish line. I didn't name my brother. I didn't have to. Because in the 3rd row, wearing a conference badge from his consulting firm, the firm that had dissolved 6 months earlier under the weight of fraud investigations and client lawsuits, sat my brother. I could see his face even under the stage lights, the way the color had drained from it, the way his hands had stopped moving, the way he understood, probably for the first time, exactly what had happened. He'd thought he'd stolen my idea. He'd thought he'd beaten me to market. He'd thought he was the smart one. But he'd never understood that what I showed him that night 3 years ago was just a prototype, a sketch. The real innovation, the actual breakthrough, had always been locked inside my head, protected by paranoia and ambition and the cold fury of someone who'd learned that trust was a luxury for people who didn't need to win. The applause when I finished was thunderous. People stood. The CEO of Google himself came on stage to shake my hand and announce the deal officially. $38 billion. The third largest acquisition in tech history. I didn't look at my brother as I left the stage. I didn't need to. That evening, my phone finally showed a message from him. Just 3 words. We should talk. I deleted it without responding. 2 weeks later, my mother called. She'd heard from him. He was struggling, she said. The consulting firm collapse had destroyed his professional reputation. He was working contract jobs, trying to rebuild. Maybe I could help him. Maybe there was a position at my company, well, at Google now, but surely I had influence. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. What I thought about instead was the moment at that Thanksgiving dinner when he'd called my work another failed project. The casual cruelty of it. The way our parents had let it pass without comment. The way he'd smiled. Some people believe in forgiveness. They believe in second chances and family bonds and the healing power of letting go. I believe in something different. I believe that every action carries consequence, and every betrayal leaves a scar. And some lessons can only be taught by letting people live with exactly what they've created. My brother had created a world where stealing someone's ideas and undermining their dreams was acceptable, where family bonds meant less than professional advancement, where cruelty could hide behind concern. So I let him live in that world, alone. The final email I received from him came 4 months after the acquisition closed. He'd written 6 paragraphs explaining, justifying, rationalizing how he hadn't really stolen anything, how business was competitive, how I'd succeeded anyway, so what did it matter? How family should mean something. I read it twice. Then I wrote back a single sentence, the same words he'd said to me across that Thanksgiving table. Another failed project. And I blocked his address. Because the thing about building an empire isn't the money or the power or the validation. It's the clarity, the absolute certainty that you don't need forgiveness from people who never apologized. You don't need closure from people who never understood what they'd opened. You just need to build something so magnificent, so undeniable, so far beyond their comprehension that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Not as an act of revenge, but as an act of transcendence.